Hi, everyone, and welcome to this module on social enterprise market strategy as part of Propel Impact's Fellowship program, presented to you by the sector. My name is Beena Tharakan. I'm a principal consultant at the sector. And before we get into the material, just want to provide an overview of the organization, the sector, and a bit of how it works in this space. Just in general, the sector does work in the area of social enterprise, social innovation, and social finance. And we really work with social enterprise ventures in terms of determining how they can grow to scale to realize their impacts in their respective target markets, so that they can really mobilize change in the system. We do this by working with them in terms of creating that operational excellence within the organization so that they can effectively grow to scale, but we also look at their market growth potential and really take on a systems integrated approach in terms of determining their growth potential and the mechanisms in which they can grow their enterprise, which will serve as a vehicle to scale their impacts. You'll hear me throughout this presentation refer to this process and really refer to it as kind of that ecosystem build approach that social enterprises take in terms of creating a market growth strategy. This enables organizations as they scale, realize impacts. We also support them in the impact measurement space, helping to create those frameworks, the data collection and reporting processes, but also related to that is operationalizing their impact strategy. So creating those pathways for impacts. And the combination of these support services that we provide to social enterprises really does serve to enable an organization to pursue opportunities to access capital, whether it be through social finance mechanisms, traditional forms of investment, or impact investment. This really prepares these ventures for a readiness to be able to qualify for the investment vehicles that are available in the market, and then to take on that type of investment. So that's the background of our organization, really tied to our mission and pillars is the aspects of creating inclusivity, equity, and prosperity in our markets through social finance and utilizing social enterprises as that vehicle to enable systems change. So for all of you that are have started a social enterprise venture or are thinking about it, amazing work I'm sure you're all doing, and really excited to see the potential for growth and creating that systems change. Now that you heard a little bit about the background on the firm, we'll cover the topics of discussion for today. We'll talk about just market research in general, really do a comparison between traditional enterprises with social enterprises, and that really serves as a basis on taking a different approach to market research. So providing that rationale and why an ecosystem building approach is typically required for social enterprises in order to realize its impacts and growth and scale. And then just also integrating the concept of collective impact across the ecosystem to really map out a ecosystem building approach. In terms of knowing the market, this really helps with understanding what is the problem being addressed, how is the solution impacting this problem, and really mapping that against your theory of change. And that serves as an approach to determine how to go about conducting research for a social enterprise in terms of a growth strategy. So using that theory of change as a reference, understanding where there is alignments and synergies across those ecosystem actors, and then identifying the right contacts, reaching out to them in an effective manner, and having those discussions to co-develop for solutions. And along this process, we will touch upon utilizing tools to manage this process, largely CRM tools to keep track of that ecosystem build approach and analyze those insights that's collected from the ecosystem in order to create that ecosystem build plan that will largely be established through partners in the system to grow the enterprise and realize its impacts for the population that it is targeting to serve. So that provides an overview of what we're going to talk about today. As mentioned, I want to start off talking about why market research should be different for social enterprises. And in order to explain this is really to kind of explain the differences with social enterprises. But traditionally, for a traditional enterprise, market research largely entails gathering insights on consumer behavior, on economic trends, validating that, and understanding how that can really serve to support a business idea in the market, and what is the planning to scale an idea to a business into a market. Also, it is the process of evaluating the viability of a new solution through research on its potential customers. So really understanding their behaviors and how an enterprise can work with the market to distribute a solution in a commercial manner. Now, what's different with social enterprises is that, and we will talk about some of the different business models of the traditional enterprises versus a social enterprise. But to start off, social enterprises likely are working within a system to serve a population that doesn't always necessarily mean they're the buyers or the purchasers of the solution. There's other intermediaries required, involved in other system actors that play a role. So it isn't this direct linear relationship that we may typically see in a traditional enterprise in its simplest form. Also, given that there are likely a number of intermediaries involved in terms of adopting the solution, there is a network of system stakeholders that are involved in terms of the solution being distributed into the market. And also related to that, the value of the solution is realized through a system, the impacts that it creates to the system, and not to individual entities or consumers. There tends to be this larger scale system impact. So hopefully that provides some context in terms of the differences of social enterprises compared to traditional enterprises. But to start laying out some of the business models that we see in traditional enterprises, I'm sure we've all heard these before, but there is the B2C, the business to consumer or customer approach in terms of where products, solutions, and services are directly provided by a business to the customer or end user who has purchased the good or service for their own use. The other model is around the B2B approach, in which products or services and solutions are delivered to businesses or companies to aid in their functioning of management and for the organization's operations. So that is another typical model that we see for traditional businesses. We also see that there are intermediaries involved in any type of business. The B2B to C approach, which is where products and services leverage another business, largely through stakeholder alignment, potentially leveraging them as a channel to reach to the end customer, who then the ultimate value is delivered to. So very much utilizing another business as an intermediary. The other type of model, and I know that there's far more than the ones that we see listed on this slide here, but do want to mention this because it will be relevant for the social enterprises, the B2G, which refers to government entities, products or services delivered to government entities, either for them to function in a management capacity. So this is very similar and synonymous to a B2B, but the business here being a government entity. But then also they do often, government entities act as an intermediary for the distribution of the solution to the end user. And that's very synonymous to that B2B to C approach that we talked about here. So just wanted to cover these. As mentioned, there are different types of models, but I think coming out of this, we can see where there's kind of that direct market strategy that certain business models load themselves to, the B2C and the B2B approach. Well, there tends to be this indirect approach with some of these other business models that require other organizations to act as entities. And this is probably where we're going to see most social enterprises operate in. So just to review, the typical approach for a traditional enterprise looks at what is the research question, what is the information that the enterprise needs to determine its growth strategy. So essentially, what is the problem that they're seeing in terms of understanding how to mobilize the solution in the market? Who is its customers? How do they behave? What are some of the other market forces that need to be considered? So having those defined in kind of objectives for a project to conduct market research and determining those specific lines of inquiries or questions. From there, using those as inputs to develop that research plan. So identifying what is the information required, what are the methods for research and analysis, and who are the responsible parties in order to conduct that research. Once that plan is determined, it's executed and the research is conducted. It's expected that in most cases, they will be leveraging secondary research sources or existing research sources, so conducting secondary research, but also primary data collection is also involved in many market research exercises, and determining the suitable methods, techniques, approaches, tools to gather that research from the market. Once collected and completed, that market research collection is completed, it comes time to analyze and report on the findings. So compiling that information, converting it into a usable format so that it can be analyzed, interpreting the results of the analysis, and reporting on recommendations. And then those recommendations typically formulate action plans. So evaluating the various paths that an enterprise can take in terms of growing into a market, assessing those options and determining the right course of action. So this provides a basis in terms of how research is typically done for an enterprise. But when we add enterprise, as mentioned, it likely is a solution that integrates within a system, an existing system. So we like to describe the business model for most social enterprise as a B to S approach, which is really that business to system approach where the solutions, products, services are delivered through the system of stakeholders to reach the end users. And that system of stakeholders are comprised of entities that have different roles and relationships with that end user or end customer. So inherently, when we talked about those previous business models, we can see this as being a very indirect way of delivering the solution to the end user. Just recalling those differences that we talked about of social enterprises, in that they serve a population and they are not always the buyer, and the adoption of the solution is achieved through these systems of stakeholders or the particular ecosystem of actors. And the value of the solution is realized through the impacts that are brought to the system. So with that, as mentioned, this is conducive to indirect channels of distributing solutions to the market. A lot of collaboration is required when you're working with a network of stakeholders within a given system. And then there is this concept of understanding what is that collective impact within the system that needs to be realized, and how is the social enterprise acting as an enabler for realizing those impacts. What this points to is that social enterprise, their business model likely relies on a partnership build approach, establishing partnerships so that these indirect channels can be put in place, realized as mechanisms to get to the end user, the end customer, the target market. The collaborations are achieved, and that collective impact approach across the system is being thought of and realized in terms of the market strategy for the social enterprise. So I want to expand on this concept of the collective impact approach. The need for partnerships is likely because there's a requirement for collective impact. And so why or what is that really pointing to? Well, when there is a social problem that's identified in the system, it is likely a result of interactions from a number of organizations in a system. And in terms of having these stakeholders come together to work together, there needs to be an established common goal or a similar goal that also provides that guidance in terms of what are our common objectives, what are we measuring towards, and how do we get there. Also, in terms of these large-scale impacts, likely there's going to be this cross-sector alignment that involves a number of organizations across the public and private sectors where they're working together in unison, in partnerships, and working towards that common goal or common agenda, as we described here, which is that shared vision where there is that common understanding of the problem and really that joint approach of solving it. There is that shared understanding of the measurement, collecting the data consistently and measuring it in a commonly understood manner across the system. And when it comes to working together and executing on the solution, there are those mutually reinforcing activities. So as mentioned in the system, there are different roles and relationships that the stakeholders play with the end user, with the social enterprise. How do they work together given these different roles that they have in that mutual plan? Given the complexity and the network of stakeholders that we're working with, continuous communication is always required to strengthen those or establish those strong collaborations and ensure that there is that common agenda and objectives along the way. What facilitates this is usually where there are these backbone organizations that really help to build the capabilities and capacities across organizations where that collective support is required. And we'll touch on this a little bit as we get into the ecosystem building approach. So when we think about a social problem that's being addressed by a social enterprise and requires that system approach, it's important to note which are the specific social problems that are being focused on in the community. So that really helps with identifying what ecosystem are we working with, who are the key actors in that. And there'll be likely multiple actors in the system, and it's determining who can influence this social problem and what are those relationships to be established. So where there is those in which we are looking at collective impact and what is the solution that's appropriate for solving the social problem in the community. So this is where we talk about that kind of co-design process. Although the social enterprise may come with a solution in mind, there might be a co-design in terms of programming, in terms of how to distribute it into the system in order to realize its impact and deliver to its target market. And as mentioned before, there will likely be an identification of cross-collaboration across the system. So you've heard me refer to that ecosystem building approach a number of times now. Now this occurs in various shapes and forms and levels. As mentioned, the actors of the ecosystem have different roles to play. They have different relationships with each other, with the target market, the population that they're serving, and also with the enterprise potentially. We at the sector have categorized ecosystem partners into kind of three broad categories, and they're not mutually exclusive from each other. One actor can place multiple types of partners for a social enterprise when we look at this ecosystem build approach. But the categories that we would often refer to come at the service delivery level. So partners that could assist with program delivery and outreach to program participants to deliver on the potential solution. There are these strategic alignment partners where there are synergies created through shared mutually reinforcing goals, so that collective impact piece. And there is that strategic alignment in mandates with these organizations. And then system alignment partners where there is that broad kind of facilitated development of ecosystem supports as well as other supports at a macro level, such as policy supports. So before getting into the mechanics of an ecosystem build approach, want to reflect back on the theory of change. And I know you've already received a module on the theory of change, which we will reference here. But in broad strokes, just want to talk about the concept of the theory of change or a social innovation through a social enterprise creating disruption in this system. Well, the identification of a problem usually is identified in terms of what is that existing in the system, and if nothing is done, what remains the same. Usually through an innovation, a social innovation in this case, what is that solution that is creating a different pathway? What is that change, and what are the impacts as a result of that change that occur? So that brings us to the theory of change and that logic model framework. You'll see on this slide here is reference to that framework that you've seen before, where it covers those inputs, so the resources needed to develop and implement the product or services. And this is largely around human resourcing, funding, Partnerships, to a certain extent, the intellectual property and infrastructure. Activities, which is the operations and the implementation of business activities, such as manufacturing, the service design, and the back-end business operations. Outputs are the result of the product, service, solution, or program. This starts looking at some of the metrics of a social innovation that's introduced into the market. So how many participants were involved in a certain program, or were able to access the solution? What were some of the skills learned as a result? Outcome are the anticipated changes that occur because of this solution. So does it create, as an example, wider access, more affordability? What are those improved outcomes for the specific population that's being served? And then those broad impacts, so the desired long-term changes that the solution will bring to the problem area that's being addressed. So what are those societal or group level changes within that target population that's being served? So if we map the partner categories that we described in the previous slide, or I think it was previous 2 slides, but we have the service delivery alignment partners, which would likely fall within the inputs of the theory of change and the activities. Those strategic alignment partners likely have mandates that are aiming to achieve the outputs and outcomes of the theory of change. And then the system alignment partners are those that have system priorities or goals and objectives that align to the impacts within the theory of change. Now, this is just a directional way of categorizing partners. As mentioned before, some partners, some entities can serve as multiple partners. And this takes that kind of assessment, that research approach to really decipher what is the relationship that is to be established and how does it enable the theory of change. So hopefully this provides that framing of how the theory of change is leveraged in terms of starting to understand how do we go about a ecosystem build approach search required for a social enterprise to investigate its potential to grow and scale its impacts. So just to reiterate again here, the service delivery partners looking at optimizing the models and enhance impacts through increased scale, either through improved efficiency, so leveraging existing assets, programs, resources in the system, or enhancing the effectiveness of service delivery. So maybe leveraging existing infrastructure, tools, or programs that can serve as a channel to deliver the social enterprises solution into the market. The strategic partners are actors who really help to expand on the outcomes, outputs, and impacts for a social enterprise. So they may have a strategic goal or mandate that aligns with the change that the enterprise is intending to achieve within the system. And then those system level partners, those are the bottom system level partners that influence design and modeling to generate impacts across that wide ecosystem that we're referring to here. So to bring this to life, we do have a case study of an employment development enterprise that is currently operating in a jurisdiction in Canada. They are a social enterprise that provides residential and commercial construction and property services to clients from various sectors, private and public included, in a Canadian municipality. And the social enterprise aspect of it is that it recruits, trains, and employs motivated individuals that are specifically from low socioeconomic groups to learn and work on site with qualified skills tradespeople so they themselves can prepare for a career in the construction industry. So this is where it is providing opportunities for population groups that may not fall onto this path if it did not exist. So it works to meet the construction needs in the community with integrity, innovation, and sustainability, and with a framework of inclusivity, diversity, and providing those opportunities in the market. So the ask for this social enterprise, because it's operating in one region in Canada, it is looking for the expansion potential into another region. So for this, it is looking to conduct market research within the ecosystem of that region and determine that expansion plan. So referring back to the theory of change and logic model framework, where we've laid out the components of the theory of change, for this particular enterprise, we see that the inputs are the training curriculum and the wraparound services that it provides to the population that it serves. This is an important aspect because this particular population does face specific set of barriers that maybe other populations wouldn't in order for it to participate in the training programs. This can include transportation, equipment such as worker boots, hard hats, tools that they would need to participate in the program. Other auxiliary support services could be childcare support services so that they are able to participate in the training while having their children being put into daycare so that they have that time released for them to participate. Also, other aspects of this is just ensuring that they have social support services. So there is that bit of that life stabilization that might be required for individuals of this population in order to participate in the program. And this is really what distinguishes it as a social enterprise from a traditional employment development program or business that would be in the market. So the activities would be to assess the training and support needs of the participants that come through the program and ensure that they receive the right training, the right supports in order to fully participate, deliver on those training and supports, and assess the skills of the participants to ensure that they are acquiring those skills to be deployed in the construction industry. So the outputs of this social enterprise would be the completion of the program by the participants and an assessment of employment readiness of its participants. So moving them towards that trajectory to obtain employment in the construction industry. Outcomes would be secure decent wage employment by participants. And one of the real drivers of the social enterprise is to address the issues of affordable housing that we're facing. And the lens that this social enterprise is taking is to provide opportunities for individuals that don't have the means to afford housing on a long-term basis, put them into roles and employment opportunities where they are making decent wages and can secure long-term affordable employment due to that occupation. So in terms of the impacts, it's looking at mobilizing the socioeconomic status of populations and through increasing their participation in the labor market and also decreasing homelessness for the target market. So when we think about for this particular case study, this social enterprise, if we think about the partnership types at the service delivery level, it could be other employment developmental agencies that provide maybe similar or complementary programming, may not have that life stabilization, wraparound support services programs. So they may be limited in providing programs to certain population groups, and there might be a partnership with this particular social enterprise to deliver on that. Trade unions that provide training, employment opportunities for individuals in the construction industry would serve as a partner at the service delivery level. And then community agencies that provide wraparound services within this region that the social enterprise is looking to expand to, leveraging existing programs and seeing how they can be complemented to provide those holistic support services for program participants in order to facilitate their success and completion of the program. Strategic partners include educational institutes. Many of the larger institutions may have mandate strategic goals in terms of building or helping to build the workforce in certain industries. And we know that the construction industry is facing a labor shortage and is projected to. So many educational institutions, such as the trades colleges, community colleges, are creating specific programs and strategies to address this need in society. Corporations that might have social responsibility programs to enable opportunities for disadvantaged communities or marginalized communities. Also, those that are also aligned with addressing labor shortages. So example, development companies, they may want to see more individuals enter into the construction trades, and then trades associations as well for similar reasons. The system level partners would be those around poverty reduction, since on average, the construction industry provides employment at a decent wage, taking individuals who may be or on a path of poverty, taking them out of that pathway and into a situation in which they are earning sustainable wages to afford housing over the long term. And then also the construction industry. So mentioned this before, system partners that are aiming to address the labor supply shortages in particular industries. So just in terms of considerations of conducting outreach, once identify the different types of partners, where they play a role in the social enterprise theory of change, and how they can help enable that, is really to start doing some of that research around what are the resources and initiatives in the system that can help generate that change that the enterprise is looking to achieve in the system. What are the various types of outreach mechanisms? What is that approach design in order to explore partnerships at the strategic, system, and service delivery levels? Conducting those activities, ensuring that they are geared towards a way to generate that interest across the various system stakeholders, and developing that plan, using the inputs from these activities to develop that plan for future expansion of the social enterprise. So to get more specifically on the execution of an approach for an ecosystem build or partnership build within an ecosystem, as mentioned, the frame of reference at first should be that theory of change, and start referring to the components of that to segment partners and conduct that scan or market research of potential partners and prospect partners in the market through existing sources of information, outreach to networks, leveraging databases, etc. Looking at where there is alignment in terms of the specificity of that theory of change that's been developed for the enterprise, and really honing in on classifying those prospective opportunities for partnerships. Now, at the sector, we strongly promote the use of managing this process through a CRM tool. Social enterprises may have existing tools to manage for their CRM that could be leveraged, or in some cases for this, given the scale of some enterprises may not have a specific tool or their tool is not adaptable for this, so can create their own databases and spreadsheets. The idea here is to have some structure and tool in place to keep track of this. And as we go through this, you will see that this will be quite a complex approach. So it's important that it gets managed from the get-go. So once that process is developed, with this is that outreach plan. Associated with this is the communications. So what is that briefing note, that concept note, which will largely be based on the theory of change? Is it different for the various segments of the partners that we are looking at? Doing kind of an assessment on where are those potential high potential partnerships that could be established. This likely is through alignment with aspects of the theory of change, mandate alignment, or even just existing relationships that have been established by the enterprise. From there, developing that kind of outreach communications. These may be customized for the partners specifically for their enterprises, or at a category level. Certain types of communication will go out to those service delivery partners that would be different than this from the strategic or system level partners. And then determining that appropriate process in terms of conducting that outreach with the various partners. From there, assuming that there will be a response from the ecosystem actors, conducting that initial outreach, communications, that discovery discussion with these potential or prospective partners, reflecting on that, debriefing on it, and strategizing on the next steps and follow-up in terms of communications and engagement, determining approaches to be positioned for opportunities where they do seem like there is potential for them, and conducting follow-up in communications as required. And then starting to really take that information that's gathered from the ecosystem. So essentially the market research that's conducted for a social enterprise, and starting to identify what are those opportunities that are worth pursuing for the social enterprise, and determining what guidance is needed to prioritize those opportunities, and then establishing those collaborative relationships to solution on opportunities in the market. So this next slide really kind of breaks down that step-by-step approach that I just walked through. I'll probably leave this as reference, but it does kind of provide a sample of how an organization can establish certain roles within it or functions to manage this process. So really kind of creating that list of potential partners in some form of database or CRM tool, conducting that outreach, managing that outreach, likely through emails, or it might be through other forms of communication when there is interest determining, that time to conduct that meeting and discovery discussion with the potential organization. From there, determining what collateral will be helpful to assess the opportunity for a partnership, and where there is identified partnerships, working and debriefing as a social enterprise to plan on that follow-up discussion, as mentioned in the previous slide. So having that engagement and that relationship building approach where the conversations get more in depth, and where there is eventually a partnership established, determining internally how does that get managed and how does that partnership get formalized, and as mentioned, determining kind of the actions that come out of that partnership. Now, this is kind of an approach for one specific organization, but this would be happening with multiple organizations and multiple segments of partners at the same time. So this will cumulatively form a ecosystem build plan for the social enterprise. Again, I'll just leave these notes for you to reference to provide some guidance on that step-by-step approach. If any of you do proceed with an ecosystem build approach, these are some tips in terms of just defining the roles, determining the modes of communication that work for this particular case example that we worked with, so may provide some lessons learned for you, ways to conduct the initial meetings, strategies on assessing partnership models, and also analyzing the outcomes of the discussions that take place. In terms of the CRM, as we refer to, or some database tool to help manage this process, these are just suggestions in terms of how to structure the database. So we have, assuming that there might be an existing database, we have typical kind of account structures. We would suggest that in terms of leveraging certain fields, such as contact name, the stakeholder type, the stakeholder group, the organization name, area of focus, email, phone number, website, and an assessment of priority for the partner. And often with existing databases, we do recommend kind of a relationship that is established with these new fields where we have the name and the record type, as well as the type of organization, as creating that relationship with the parent document, or sorry, the parent record, and also segmenting that in terms of the account and contact information. Now, this is not going to apply for all organizations that don't have an existing CRM. This was just provided as guidance in terms of the types of fields that you may want to consider building in your CRM to manage the partnership build process. So going back to our case study example, as this social enterprise did conduct this market research for this ecosystem in the new jurisdiction that they were looking to expand to, they did work with many of the potential partners, or reach out to those potential partners using the approach that was described. And these included those service delivery partners, those employment services, wraparound services, trade unions, and other charities that have similar mandates or provide similar services. Strategic partners, there was quite a variety that were discovered through this process, not only the trades colleges or associations and college sponsors, but technology partners, foundations, anchor agencies, and university researchers were others that were determined to have alignment as part of this market research that was conducted. The system alignment partners were other employment support organizations that did connect with system-wide priorities, skills development, economic development, affordable housing, poverty reduction, criminal reform, and infrastructure development system partners. So these were likely government programs within that region that focused on these system priorities that were connected with as part of this process. So to break down kind of the results of this market research that this particular social enterprise collected from the system level partners, it was determined that they really helped to facilitate those regional and ecosystem supports and policy supports. So from there, the short-term steps were to continue with those exploratory discussions and determine those potential partnership models. From there, as in terms of medium-term steps, there were those networking opportunities. So as success or expansion was being realized by this social enterprise, starting to communicate that through the networks and seeing where there could be further opportunities. In terms of long-term actions or steps, there's opportunities for that system-wide research to understand how to address those labor gap shortages, build on a skills trade workforce, looking at housing and homelessness in terms of the impacts that were achieved within this region. So much more of those longer term kind of outputs and impacts that could be utilized by the system level partners or could be co-developed with them. And then looking at them in ways to create ecosystem enhancement projects down the line. Maybe an initial expansion into this new jurisdiction occurred, but there's opportunity to build on that and potentially leaning on these system level partners. For the strategic level partners, where there is that opportunity to create synergies because of those mutual reinforcing interests, activities, and goals, in terms of conducting those exploratory discussions on an ongoing basis and building upon that, and also determining, what are those potential partnership models. Because some of them may have similar or cross-programming in this area, there's an opportunity to share lessons learned with them, general knowledge sharing, again, networking opportunities, and also cross-referrals between programs. And then also those co-design opportunities. So where there are synergistic programs, where there are opportunities to bring them together and really leverage on the potential of the ecosystem to implement them in the system and serve that target population. So for a longer term kind of action plan with these particular groups, it's looking at those shared projects, the funding opportunities, those cross collaborations, and starting to also collect the information, thought leadership to influence policy decisions, potentially creating that advocacy for this population group being served and doing that coalition building with the ecosystem actors. In terms of service delivery partners, helping with the operations or providing that service delivery and wraparound supports of the program, conducting those exploratory conversations and ongoing discussion to determine those potential partnership models. That will always be an immediate step as part of this process across the partners, different types of partners. But then where service delivery agreements were there, determining what are those official kind of contractual agreements that need to be established with the partner and the social enterprise, and then executing on those contractual agreements, monitoring and evaluating on the program objective that they've achieved together, conducting that impact measurement, and reassessing on an ongoing basis the sustainability of the program and the agreements that were established, and really evaluating the achievement of the collective impact and interests of all those involved. So to continue with the market growth strategy for a social enterprise, utilizing that ecosystem build-up approach, it is always going to be on that building of relationships and leveraging the insights gained from the previous interactions to really mobilize and create that momentum in terms of that partnership build. Often in these exercises, partnerships are often, or potential partnerships are often identified with organizations in which there are some initial discussions, and there is support from the ecosystem in terms of identifying that alignment and that further building that can occur into the ecosystems. We can't emphasize enough to document those interactions. So they are, is a history, there is an understanding of the evolution that has taken place and what the current state is at, and leveraging those previous interactions to inform those future or upcoming interactions in order to build off of each other. And then once that is enough insight and intel is collected from the ecosystem, there's opportunity to really build out that map of all the different actors and determining how they work together as a system to really mobilize the social enterprise solution and help achieve that theory of change and create that collective impact across the ecosystem of partners. So that's the conclusion of this module in terms of market research for a social enterprise. Hopefully from this, you can see that it takes on a very different approach than traditional businesses that would do that traditional kind of approach to market research, where there is that direct service to a target market. While for social enterprises that are often operating in an ecosystem, there is a degree of complexity that requires a more strategic, intentional approach that entails looking at the ecosystem actors in a collective manner and determining how all of them can really work together and how the enterprise can work with them within a system to serve its target market and target population.